Professor Scott Lucas, thank you so much for accepting our interview request for the Political Reflection magazine. It's also a privilege for me to conduct this interview with you as one of your previous students at Birmingham University. It's an honor to hear your thoughts and about the election of 2020 in the United States. I have many questions, to be honest, to pose you, but little time to cover them all. Since you are constantly appearing on the major international TV channels about American politics and streaming daily news on your website, anyone can follow you on your YouTube or enduringamericaworldview.com. For your further thoughts, if you cannot find enough time to handle with some questions. Okay, let me begin with my first question. As an American citizen and also a scholar working on American politics, have you ever witnessed this kind of election campaign and results before? What is the unique about the United States election in 2020? Why was it so popular in the rest of the world? For instance, many news channels in Turkey covered the United States election nearly all day, and even many ordinary people in Turkey were involved in the discussion about the American election.
It's a great honor to be here. First of all, thank you so much. It's very impressive what you're doing with political reflections. It's been impressive what you've done in all areas of international politics, including US politics. But your question, it reminds me that when I moved from being an academic to also working as a journalist back in 2008, and we started what was then Enduring America. It's now eaworldview.com. But back in 2008, it launched on the evening of the election. And that, of course, was the Obama versus McCain election. And we thought that was historic. And indeed, it was in a way. It was historic because it was the first Black American candidate for president, and he triumphed. And in the months after that, his inauguration, where you've got more than 1 million people that are watching, it was like this idea of this America coming out of the Iraq War, well, still in the middle of the Iraq War, in the middle of that intervention in Afghanistan. But here was like, things can change for the better in the US. This was a historic election 12 years later, but in a very different way. Because whereas the Obama election in 2008 was not just that idea of hope and change, but that idea of responsibility, that idea of competence, that idea of an American community working together. This election was very much going to be around that figure of Donald Trump, which was so different. And it's not just what we might say that Donald Trump is not necessarily competent in what he's done as president. It's not necessarily that he has not exactly shown an engagement with the issues you and I want to talk about. It's that it doesn't matter to Trump. It didn't matter to Trump in the idea of this was us versus them politics, that it was his quote base, MAGA, Make America Great Again, versus those that he thought were the enemies. And the real question was going to be, we thought that would be resolved on election night, would that message win? Would this message win? Because when you talk about Trump in terms of us versus them, it's not just his supporters versus his opponents. It's it's Donald Trump versus the American system. It's Donald Trump versus the courts, versus Congress, versus the fake news media, versus professors like you and me. It's Donald Trump versus everybody. And that type of politics, I think, is the greatest challenge to the American system, in combination with issues like Trump Russia, Trump Ukraine, government shutdowns, destruction of the environment. Probably the most important American election since the American Civil War, since 1860. And I'm not exaggerating that for a fact. I mean, I honestly believe that. And of course, it didn't stop on election night. So what makes this a doubly historic election is that for the first time, we have got a candidate who happens to be still the president, who's refusing to accept the outcome of the election. It's like, okay, I won, in all caps on Twitter, I won. And if you say I didn't win, you're wrong because the election was stolen from me. But what makes that second part of the history? So now, not just Trump, but the fact he's defying the election, what makes that second historical point so significant is he told us months ago he was going to do this. Donald Trump, in an interview with Fox News in July, when Chris Wallace, the interviewer, said, "Will you accept the outcome of the election?" And Trump said, "Well, no, I might not. We'll see." And then when he appointed, rushed through the confirmation of the Supreme Court Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, that she had to be on the bench before election day. And people said, "Why?" And he says, "I want a 9-justice Supreme Court in case they have to hear a case about millions of fraudulent ballots." Now, of course, there aren't millions of fraudulent ballots out there, but Trump is going to say that and take it all the way to the Supreme Court so they could overturn the election, which is precisely what we're in right now. So it's almost like this would be like the crime of the American century, but it's like the criminal saying, "I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Try and stop me."